I want to talk about prophecy today, a specific area of prophecy that's always been of some interest to people. Is it really possible, do you suppose, that Old Testament prophecies have end-time applications? A lot of people, I think, sometimes wonder about that. They see, well, I can sort of see a comparison between the things that Isaiah said in the 20th century United States. I can see some types of comparisons with Ezekiel in the end time. And then, of course, there's Daniel. But maybe all those were all fulfilled in the past. Maybe only Revelation has end-time relevance, or perhaps the Olivet prophecy. Are the end-time applications of Old Testament prophecy deliberate or just coincidental, as, for example, if you had history repeating itself? Well, Jesus in his Olivet prophecy made a very curious statement. I'd like you to turn to the account of it found in the 24th chapter of Matthew to take a look at this statement, to analyze what it was that Jesus was saying and how it might answer that question I just asked. Are these end-time applications of Old Testament prophecy accidental, or are they deliberate? Matthew, the 24th chapter, the entire chapter, in fact, 24 and 25, all constitute what is called the Olivet prophecy. And they are given, all these statements are given in answer to a very simple question. Verse 1, Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to him, See you not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? Just as far as my own personal experience, I don't recall hearing any subject from the Bible discussed more in my lifetime by people I might overhear here on an airplane just talking, or from someone that I might happen to run into who wants to discuss. I don't recall having heard anything ever discussed more than the Olivet prophecy, the particular points relevant to it, even though the people concerned may not have had any idea that it was the Olivet prophecy. They just heard that there'll be wars and rumors of wars, and they've heard of diseases and pestilence. And the disciples asked the question that almost any of us would want to ask Jesus if we had half a chance. What is the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? How are we going to know when these things go on? Now, Jesus proceeded to generalize, really, to give a lot of sort of signs of the times. And for the most part, most of these things that he talks about are things that have been going on for the last 1900 plus years. There have been wars and rumors of wars. There's been a disease epidemic here. There's been a famine there. There's been an earthquake there. And they just go on and on and on. And you ask yourself, how can these be signs of the end of the world? What can I get hold of in this to make me realize that I'm getting close to the end? Because these things have always been. Jesus' disciples who sat there listening to him talk could have said, but Master, these things have always been. There have always been either the war or a rumor of a war in my lifetime, and I've heard it from my grandparents from time immemorial. And even the pages of the Scriptures are replete with it. How are we to learn anything from all of this? And of course, early on, Jesus said, don't be dismayed. The end is not yet. Basically, he tells them all these things are just the beginning of sorrows. Just, you haven't seen anything yet, he said, whenever these things take place. It's down in verse 14 when he begins to become specific and some things that you can get a handle on. He first says, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. That's fascinating, because there is right now not a nation under heaven where the name of Jesus Christ is not known. There is nowhere where the essential core of Jesus' message has not been preached. Isn't there? The Bible has been translated into every known language on the face of the earth. But the true gospel apparently has not been preached. This requirement has not been met, because he doesn't say that has to happen before the end comes. He said it will happen, and then the end will come. So this particular requirement somehow is yet ahead of us. But the peculiar statement is in verse 15. When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso reads, let him understand, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Why is that peculiar? Why am I, surprised that somehow or another Jesus would bring in the question of the abomination of desolation? Well, primarily because his listeners, and the people sitting before him who had heard this, any other Jewish audience to which he would have spoken, knew the term Abomination of Desolation. It was a term that had been used commonly among them. They even knew who the person was who had placed the Abomination of Desolation, and they knew precisely what the abomination was. To their mind, it was one Antiochus Epiphanes who entered into the temple of God, desecrated the altar by offering swine's flesh upon the altar, and then placed a statue of Jupiter Olympus in that place. This had been known by the Jews as the abomination that made desolate from that time. But now here is Jesus reaching back into the book of Daniel, taking a prophecy that his listeners would have assumed had been fulfilled in history, and telling them, when you see the abomination of desolation stand in the holy place, let those that be in Judea flee into the mountains. Jesus took an Old Testament prophecy and placed it squarely into the future. How far out, his disciples had no way of knowing, but he definitely placed that scripture into a future time reference. So I answered my first question. These end-time applications of Old Testament prophecies were deliberate on God's part right from the very beginning. Jesus did not even allow for a previous fulfillment of what this man's of Daniel's prophecy. He didn't indicate that this was kind of a secondary or a repetition. He said, the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel. Now, I think that's a very important thing for us to understand, that he understood Daniel's prophecy to deal not with Antiochus Epiphanes, but with the future, somewhere downstream. So he goes on to say, that let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house, neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. Woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray you that your flight be not in the winter, or on the Sabbath day. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. That's a fascinating scripture. One thing that's fascinating is, why should you pray that your flight be not on the Sabbath day if the Sabbath day is not binding upon Christians? Now, the arguments that have been advanced are, well, for those living in or around Jerusalem, well, they could get stoned by a bunch of Orthodox Jews if they were to be seen leaving the city on the Sabbath day. But wait. The people who are leaving are people without even an extra change of clothes. They are carrying no bags. They have just laid down or stopped with whatever they were doing. They have gotten down. If they happened to be on a rooftop, they did not go back down into their house. They went right across the top of the way of the roofs to the easiest way down and out of the city. There was no question of getting into difficulty. Then or today, if you go down to Jerusalem right now today, and on the Sabbath day, you'll see cars going to and from hither and yon throughout the city. There's nothing unusual about people moving around except in a very narrow little part of that city on the Sabbath day where some very Orthodox Jews live. And this doesn't say just in Jerusalem. It says in Judea, which includes the whole countryside, the whole province round about Jerusalem, that all of those people are to flee into the mountains. Just the whole very idea of the gates being shut on Sabbath, is that where the problem is? The gates being shut on the Sabbath would not prohibit you from getting out of the city. And it wasn't just the city that was at stake. It seemed very evident that there's something to do a little bit more than that with this flight being on the Sabbath. So they were warned that their flight should not be on the winter. That's easy to understand. You're going to be very miserable out trying to make your way up and down the countryside without having taken any extra shelter, no tent that you've been able to carry, no preparations. You just had to get yourself together and get out of that place. He says, except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Let's go on over to Mark's account of this in the 13th chapter of Mark and see what comparison we can find here. Beginning in verse 9 of Mark 13. Take heed to yourselves, for they shall deliver you up to councils, and the synagogues you shall be beaten, and you shall be brought before kings and rulers for my sake, for a testimony against them. And the gospel must first be published among all nations. But when they shall lead you up and deliver you, take no thought beforehand what you shall speak, neither do you premeditate. But whatever shall be given you in that hour, that speak, because it's not you that speaks, but the Holy Spirit. He then spoke of the same thing that was recorded in Matthew's gospel, that brother shall deliver up brother, that they'll be betraying one another, they'll be hated by all men for Jesus' name's sake. Then comes verse 14. When you shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not, let him that readeth understand. Then let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains. Now, the reason I wanted to read Mark's account was both that he underlined the point about the gospel having to be preached in all nations, but primarily because of his reference or use of the same expression, let him that readeth understand. The question I had when I read this the first time in Matthew was, does this refer to the person that reads the gospel account, to him understanding? Well, Jesus wasn't writing when he made this statement. He was talking. The question I had was, well, then, is this Matthew's edit? But Mark has it as well. No, I think that Jesus made the statement orally to a group of people who were listening to him, and he said, let him that readeth. Read what? Reads Daniel. Not the gospel account. Daniel. Let the one that reads Daniel understand. That's a rather cryptic warning. It's a little difficult to understand precisely why Jesus would have said that, except that apparently it's not obvious. Apparently the significance of this abomination of desolation is not just really all that obvious to the reader. He might reach a wrong conclusion. Turn back to Luke, the 21st chapter, where there's a slight variance on this account. It gives us a little bit more of an understanding. Luke 21 and verse 20. When you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Now, he doesn't use the term abomination. He just uses desolation, and he uses a different thing. He doesn't say, when you see the abomination of desolation, when you see Jerusalem compassed about with armies. This is when you do what? Well, you actually, if you're in Judea, you flee to the mountains. Let those that are in the midst of it depart out. Let not them that are in the countries enter in thereto. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things that are written should be fulfilled. He says, woe to them that are with child and those that give suck in those days. It's going to be very difficult and very hard on the mother who has a little child. For there shall be great distress upon the land and wrath upon this people. They shall fall by the edge of the sword, shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Now there are several things that come together at the same time, according to what Jesus said. First, the true gospel finally reaches all nations. Secondly, Jerusalem is surrounded. Thirdly, Daniel's abomination of desolation, whatever that is set up. There is still one short moment in this time, very brief moment, in which to flee. So brief, in fact, that the difference in time of simply walking across from the roof of your house to your neighbors and on out of the city and out, as opposed to going down into your house, collecting a few clothes or some warmer garments, going out your front door and making your way out, that short period of time, that short delay, can make the difference in whether you're out or whether you're in. So it's that close. And it's just prior, also, as you'll read in these accounts, to the heavenly sign. That is, suddenly the sun and the moon beginning to change, all sorts of dramatic things taking place in the environment that signal you that the day of the Lord is at hand. Now, the question is, just what did Jesus mean by the abomination of desolation? What did Daniel mean by the abomination of desolation? And what is this cryptic warning, whoso reads, let him understand? As I've already pointed out, I think it was stated in Christ's words, because both Matthew and Luke record that particular expression. Read, then, I think refers to Daniel, as I said, not the gospel accounts. I want you to turn back with me now to the particular account in Daniel that Christ referred to. Daniel chapter 11 and verse 13. Actually, I think I wrote down the wrong verse. Actually, I want verse 31. I did a little transposition there. It's not 13, but 31. For the ships of Chittim, verse 30, shall come against him, whoever him is. Therefore he shall be grieved and return, and shall have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant, and arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that makes desolate. Simple. What was it? Well, first of all, I've already explained to some small extent what it was. But to give the historical context and a little feeling for what we're dealing with here in the 11th chapter of Daniel, Daniel's prophecies essentially focus on one governmental system, that of Babylon. We've kind of referred to it as a great world-ruling kingdom, but that's not really true, because Babylon was not a world-ruling kingdom, because there were great dynasties in the world and other places at this period of time, great powerful kingdoms that were established that had nothing whatsoever to do with Babylon. What we are dealing with in Babylon is the specific Gentile system of government that dominated this part of the world, and of a particular system that would dominate it from the time of Daniel's prophecies until the return of Christ, and the establishment of Christ's kingdom. Now, Daniel 2 has been one of the most fascinating of prophecies, and one that has always attracted a great deal of attention. And it is really a very simple prophecy. It requires very little in the way of interpretation. The interpretation is given by Daniel, and I don't know of a single commentary that differs on the overall interpretation of the second chapter of the book of Daniel. Daniel, for those of you who might not recall, in the second chapter describes a great image. It had a head of gold. It had a breast of silver. It goes all the way down to brass and iron, and then finally iron mingled with clay at his feet. Daniel, in his interpretation of this vision, divides this image into 4 separate systems. And it actually is, some people have called it the vision of 5 kingdoms, not 4 but 5, because it also includes in that vision the return of Christ, the establishment of Christ's kingdom by the stone, which is Christ, smiting this great image on his feet, breaking its feet, and of course destroying the whole image. But one of the most important things about this image to bear in mind is that Daniel, or the vision that was given and is interpreted by Daniel, is not a vision of 4 images, one of gold, one of silver, one of brass, and one of iron. It is an image of one great image with different metals in descending order or decaying or decadent order as you make your way down the image. I think this is very important. We tend, when we're interpreting Daniel's prophecies, especially when you look later on at some of the other interpretations that he uses, where he describes them as 4 different kinds of beasts, a lion, a bear, a leopard, and then finally this strange beast which encompasses certain characteristics of all 3 of them that were before him. But the point in Daniel, the latter visions of the beasts, give you a different perspective on this great world system. But the point of Daniel 2 is to help you to understand that this system, which we see in Babylon, followed by the Medo-Persian Empire, followed by Alexander's empire, followed by the Roman Empire, this system is 1, not 4. And that Babylon as the head, Nebuchadnezzar as the leader of Babylon as the head, is the substance, the reality of this image down through all of its years. You may wonder a little bit why it is that when Babylon was destroyed, Babylon fell long ago. You read these prophecies that Babylon would be desolate, the Arab would not pitch his tent there, that the whole place would be desolate forevermore. And we all know that Babylon was destroyed by the Medes and the Persians, that it actually was left as an absolute desolate wilderness. You can get on an airplane, go there today, and wander around the ruins if you would like. Why is it then that there are so many prophecies given long after Babylon was destroyed about the destruction of Babylon, about the corruption of Babylon? The answer is that the Roman Empire was still the Babylonian system. Now, how could this be? What mechanism did this take place? Or how could this possibly be? The answer is surprisingly simple. That even though the Medes and the Persians came in and conquered Babylon, they themselves were conquered by the Babylonian religion. Although Alexander came in and conquered the Medes and the Persians, he himself was conquered by the Babylonian religion. Alexander's custom basically was to worship all the gods of the nations that he conquered. And by the time you come to Rome, Rome still is conquered by the Babylonian system, the Babylonian religious system. So the religion of Babylon, actually, even though the nation was destroyed, even though the city was demolished, even though their people were taken into captivity, the religion survived. And there we have this unity, this unifying spirit, if you will, that follows all the way through Babylon, the Medo-Persian empires, Alexander's empire, and finally the Roman Empire, which finally will be destroyed at the return of Christ. That is why when you get to the end of Revelation, you see this angel crying in the midst of heaven, Babylon is fallen, and has become the whole of every foul demon and every hateful bird, and so on. The return of Christ is when the ultimate, final destruction of Babylon takes place. And finally, at that time, and only at that time, is the Babylonian system finally destroyed. So we have successive degenerate phases of the same system that go on. And this is what Daniel's prophecies are all about. He doesn't really concern himself with Egypt. Egypt is just on the fringes of Daniel's prophecy. He doesn't concern himself with the eastern empires of India and China. They are completely outside of the pale of his prophecy. He concerns himself not at all with any other part of what we would today call the New World. Whether he even knew of it or not is irrelevant. For he is concerned with the Babylonian Empire and all of the successors or all the continuations or all the resurrections of that empire in new forms down through all generations and their effect, its effect on God's people down through those generations, which does finally culminate in Christ's kingdom. Now, later, the prophecies of the beast, as I said, use different metaphors. They actually show us all these different kinds of beasts. But again, we are dealing with the same thing. The abomination of desolation in Daniel 11 takes place in type at the very end of the third phase of these kingdoms. First of all, as I said, we deal with, both in the image of Daniel and also in the beast of Daniel, the Babylonian Empire, symbolized by a great lion. It's destroyed. It's replaced by another great beast, which is a bear, Medo-Persia. Then it's destroyed and replaced by another one, a leopard. Now, the prophecies, and it would be much too time-consuming for me to go into all of them today about Alexander, show how Alexander was to conquer and how he was to destroy, how he was to reach out. In fact, did conquer the entirety of the Babylonian Empire and reach out, I think, in areas that Babylon had not really taken, because he did encompass and take in Egypt as well. Alexander then was cut off early in life. He was succeeded by his 4 generals who divided his empire up into 4 parts. These are all foretold in Daniel generations before it actually took place. Finally, in the process of time, 2 of these particular kingdoms or generals become dominant. They become referred to in Daniel 11, and Daniel 11 gets into great detail about the activities of those 2 particular kingdoms, those 2 descendants of Alexander the Great. They were not his physical descendants. They were merely his descendants in a moral sense or political sense. They begin to refer to them as the king of the north and the king of the south. Syria, which was to the north of Palestine, much, much larger and much more encompassing than Syria is today, was the northern power. The dynasty of kings were called the Seleucidae. The group of kings that were the last group to rule in that area called Antiochus. Antiochus the first, Antiochus the second, and so forth. You have the Ptolemies in Syria, in Egypt in the south. Now, you probably have heard the old expression, at the time of the end, the king of the south shall push at him. I remember from the time I was a little boy hearing people talk about the end time and signs of the time. One of the earliest things I can recall is the king of the south pushing at him. And I can recall my relatives sitting around on a hot summer night. It's long before television was a factor, and they had to talk about something, and the Bible was always stimulating. They'd say, well, you know, the king of the south's going to push at the king of the north. And who do you think the king of the south is? Well, I don't know. I think it's Egypt, and so on. So many different things were advanced. And it is a fascinating study to go into. Well, the king of the north and the king of the south are intimately involved in this abomination of desolation, because it is the king of the north, a king of the north, who sets up the abomination of desolation. We had several of them, as I mentioned before. The last dynasty of this northern Syrian kingdom were all called Antiochus. Antiochus the Great, they had different titles, but Antiochus the first, second, and third. Antiochus the fourth called himself Epiphanes, or the illustrious one. And some sources say that that's actually a title of divinity. You know, the term Epiphany actually applied to Christ has to do with his return or his appearance, or I'm not sure, or was it his ascension? I forget exactly the meaning of the Greek word in this case. Antiochus, of course, was a man very devoted to the Greek way of things. I'm not just sure what his own, whether he was a Syrian or whether he was indeed a Greek. I think he was Greek. His family were. But certainly he was a Hellenist and was very much concerned about spreading the Greek culture and the Greek religion by whatever means were at his disposal to do. As we read along in Daniel the 11th, we come down to verse 21. I'm breaking in the middle of things at this point because we have had some Antiochus go before. We've had a tax raiser go before, and finally he was cut off and destroyed. In verse 21, in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Now, I won't bore you with a great deal of historical references to this, because I think, as far as I know, every historical source is in agreement with the identity of this vile person with Antiochus Epiphanes. The descriptions of the way that he obtained these things are all recorded in history, where you can read in 1st and 2nd Maccabees, you can read from other historical sources, Josephus and others, who tell you more or less specifically what this man did. And you find remarkable correlation between the way he did things, and instead of necessarily overcoming people by force, that he at first moves in and begins to win converts to himself personally, and by flattery, and by bribery, and by cajoling people, and by causing business and craft to prosper, he increases his power gradually and steadily until he comes into ascendancy in his kingdom. It's all described historically, which Daniel describes here. Daniel is so accurate, in fact, that many of the critics insist on placing the time of the writing of Daniel in 175 B.C. Now, in case you're not a historical buff and dates don't mean anything to you, that's during the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes. That's at the time he was on the scene performing the very things that Daniel wrote here. Whereas, in fact, Daniel tells us that he wrote while Nebuchadnezzar still lived. Now, this makes Daniel, of course, or the writer of Daniel, some sort of an absolute out-and-out fraud, if that's the case. And we are still left with the problem, even if we place him in 175 B.C., of explaining how it was that he was able to foretell everything from 175 B.C. on, including the Roman Empire, the establishment of the Roman Empire. But anyway, that's when the critics date Daniel, because why did they put him there? Because of internal evidence? Because of external evidence? For one reason: he is too accurate. If you search it out, they will say it is impossible for a Hebrew in Nebuchadnezzar's court to have described in detail the doings of Antiochus Epiphanes with such accuracy. That's kind of a little bit of a lame excuse, but it's the same reason it was given for dividing Isaiah into 1st and 2nd Isaiah, and as some have done later on into 3rd, 4th, and 5th Isaiah, is because, as they say, certain concepts that were in Isaiah lay beyond the horizons of a 7th century prophet. What are you going to say when somebody says that? When the whole point of Isaiah is that he wrote under the inspiration of God. He was not a historian, he was a prophet. And yet that is the reason why many people say no. And see, the difficulty with Isaiah is, unlike Daniel, you can't just pick up Isaiah and put him later, because he knew too much about things that went before. And so they have to split him up to where he actually, two different people writing at two whole different times, because he is too accurate about two times. And somebody else came along and saw what the others had missed. He is too accurate about still more times. And so now we have to consider there might not have been just two Isaiahs, that there might have been 3 or 4 or more. But the prophets were incredible. It did, of course, create all sorts of problems for people. But let's get back to Antiochus as to what he did. With the arms of a flood they shall be overflown from before him, and shall be broken. Yea, also the prince of the covenant, which is a reference to the high priest. And he caused one of the high priests to be deposed and replaced by a man named Jason, who was loyal to him personally. And Jason, of course, had bribed him and other people to try to obtain their high priesthood as well. He not only succeeded in persecuting the Jewish religion, he actually corrupted it, which is in some ways a much more serious crime, in the sense that so many people, and much more damage can be done, by the way, when you get into a religious system and corrupt it, than you can do from outside by attacking them. Think about it. If you persecute a religious group of people, if you put some of them to death, what do? You drive them together. You make them stronger. You actually give them a reason for fighting you. Much more effective, Antiochus found, was to get inside by hiring and by bribery to corrupt even the high priest of this time. He did so quite successfully. He shall stir up, verse 25, his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. The king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army. He shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. Yea, that feed, I don't know exactly what they mean by that, but apparently Antiochus was able to deceive the king of the south, and by trickery was able to defeat him quite handily. Yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him. In other words, internal dissension in Egypt was a part of the reason why the king of the south was defeated. His army shall overflow, many shall fall down slain. Both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief. They shall speak lies at one table, sitting in conference with one another, apparently some sort of peace conference, lying to one another in their teeth. But it shall not prosper. For yet the end shall be at the time appointed. Then shall he return into his land with great riches. That is Antiochus Epiphanes, or the king of the north. His heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. Now, as I said before, Antiochus was a Hellenizer. One of his great missions in life was to spread the Greek culture and Greek religion far and wide. Consequently, there was an attempt on his part to suppress the Jewish religion. He actually at one point forbade any type of Jewish worship of any sort. Circumcision was forbidden. He encouraged the participation in athletics, which was an interesting little ploy because at this point in time, the Greek stadium and the athletics that went on in the Greek stadium were all conducted in the nude, totally naked. And so consequently, there wasn't any question of hiding your identity. As a result, if you were going to participate in that, you had better be uncircumcised, or else it would be immediately evident to everyone that you were a Jew. This was a part of the approach of Antiochus Epiphanes, and it was during this time that we are told that some young Jewish men even submitted to skin grafts in order to try to pretend or appear to be uncircumcised when they had been circumcised. So, he actually is against the covenant. I'm sorry, I lost my place here. He will return into his land with great riches. His heart shall be against the holy covenant. He shall do exploits and return to his own land. And at the time appointed, he shall return and come toward the south. Now, here he comes again in another campaign. But it shall not be like the former, and it shall not be like the latter. Obscure expressions. This is apparently some sort of middle campaign, and we're not told what it means. For the ships of Kittim shall come against him. Now, the commentaries tell us that what this is talking about is the Roman ambassadors coming into Egypt in ships of Kittim. Kittim apparently a reference to Cyprus. Why Cyprus particularly, I'm not entirely sure. But it does have to do with the Romans who historically we know at this time came in and did participate in turning him back. We are hanging now on the ragged edge, as a matter of fact, of the end of the remnants of Alexander's kingdom and the ascendancy of the Roman Empire as the logical, or the illegitimate, maybe I should say, successor of the Babylonian kingdom. So the ships of Kittim shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and shall return and shall have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. In other words, with those Jews who had forsaken the covenant of God, he actually enters into intelligence or covert operations with them, again corrupting those that are involved in the worship of God. An arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. It was at this time that he offered swine's flesh on the altar in God's temple, and shall place the abomination of desolation, or the abomination that makes desolate. Some translations say that astonishes everyone. It's difficult to know how that is to be taken. The Greek is, of course, desolation. And we have this word in Hebrew, but the point is this was apparently the statue of Jupiter Olympus, a carved statuary or image of a pagan god that was placed right in the holy place. Then such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. But the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. Now, historically, that obviously would refer to the Maccabees, who organized a rebellion against Antiochus. He came down to try to defeat them and was unsuccessful. He says, yet they shall fall by the sword and by flame and by captivity and by spoil many days. When they shall fall, they shall be helped with a little help, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries. Some of them of understanding shall fall to try them and to purge and to make them white, even to the time of the end. I want to pause here just for a moment. Because you see what we're looking at here in the abomination of desolation that he is speaking of here. I've been giving this to you as though everything Daniel was talking about was Antiochus Epiphanes. But Jesus said it wasn't. What Antiochus Epiphanes is a historical model of the abomination, or that is of the one, that vile person, who will at some future time place the abomination of desolation. Now that's very clear from Christ's statement, because he doesn't, the wording and the way he went about it shows Christ looking entirely future, having to do with the abomination, not looking back. And so at most, Antiochus Epiphanes and that statue of Jupiter Olympus and that offering of swine's flesh in the holy place can only be a type or a historical model of what is to take place at some time in the future. Continuing now, when we understand that, Jesus told us to let us, if we read this, we'd better understand it. And so he says, when you see the abomination of desolation, get out of Jerusalem. Get out of Judea. They that understand among the people at that time, he says, shall instruct many. Yet they shall fall by the sword and by flame and captivity and spoil many days. Jesus in the Olivet prophecy told us that the saints would be persecuted, that they would fall, that they would betray one another, didn't he? It's all there. Now, when they shall befall, they shall be helped with a little help, but many will cleave to them with flatteries. The implication almost is that they themselves, that is, the children who know and who do understand, the children of the covenant, can be corrupted by flatteries when the time comes and not understand what is taking place before their very eyes. Some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them, to purge, to make, even unto the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. And the king shall do according to his will. He shall magnify or exalt himself, and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper until the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. Fascinating. We are dealing here not with Antiochus, for Antiochus was nothing more than a historical model of this one that is to come at the end time. He's referred to elsewhere in the Bible as the man of sin. He is loosely referred to as the Antichrist. He is referred to as the beast in Revelation. This one is going to do the things that he's talking about here. He says in verse 37, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, apparently he is celibate, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. This man is identified in 2 Thessalonians 2. He's identified in Revelation 13. In his estate he shall honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and precious stones and pleasant things. We get into this area here, a lot of the commentaries say that at this point Daniel began to drift off because nobody knew what happened to Antiochus after this point in his career. But Daniel goes on and tells us much more. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. He shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him. The king of the north shall come at him like a whirlwind, like with chariots and with horsemen, with many ships. He will enter into the countries, and shall overflow and pass over. He shall enter also into the glorious land, that's obviously Palestine. Many countries shall be overthrown. These shall escape out of his hand. Edom, that's Turkey probably today, Moab, the other side Transjordan, south, the chief of the children of Ammon, Transjordan, north. He shall stretch forth his hand upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. This would have been the king of the south. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. But tidings out of the east and the north shall trouble him, therefore shall he go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. We're looking down to the end time now. It's an interesting thing in prophecy, how these things can start out dealing purely with a historical model. And at some undefinable point in the prophecy, it drifts into the antitype, that is the ultimate end-time fulfillment of all these things. Jesus makes it clear to us that by the time we get to the Abomination of Desolation, we have moved into the type, not just the antitype. We've gone well beyond Antiochus Epiphanes at this time. And he, that is this king of the north, shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas, in the glorious holy mountain. Yet he will come to his end, and none shall help him. At that time shall Michael stand up, that great prince which stands for the children of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. This is identified elsewhere in the Bible. There is a time unique in all human history that will take place. It is a time of great trouble, of great tribulation. There has never been any before it, nor will there ever be again. It makes it totally unique. This is to take place at that time. Many of them, verse 2, that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake. Where are we in prophecy? Where are we in the scheme of things? Without any warning, without any change from way back here dealing with history, we are now at the time of the resurrection of the dead. Some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. And they that be wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. But you, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro. Knowledge shall be increased. So I, Daniel, looked, and behold, there stood other two, one on this side of the bank of the river, the other on that side of the bank of the river. And one said to the man clothed in linen that was upon the waters of the river, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? Now that's a good question. Almost anyone say, when is this going to take place? I heard the man clothed in linen upon the waters of the river, held up his right hand and his left hand to heaven, swore by him that lives forever, that it shall be for a time and times and a half. You ever heard that before? You ever heard that expression, time and times and half a time before? Sure you have. We seem to keep focusing in somehow in prophecy on some 3.5-year period, at least one. Some argue that there are two, but it's a little hard to maintain. It seems more likely that there is one, and it all comes together on these things. So the time of this vision is right up at the beginning of a 3.5-year period. I heard, I didn't understand. So I said, "Oh my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and tried. The wicked shall do wickedly, but none of the wicked shall understand. The wise shall understand." It's interesting. The wicked can try, and they certainly will try to understand, but they won't. It's going to be the wise who understand. From the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away and the abomination that makes desolate set up. Same time. And Antiochus did both of them at the same time. From that time, there shall be 1,290 days. And so when Jesus described the abomination of desolation, was he talking about the desolation of the temple in 69 A.D. when Titus took Jerusalem? No. The context of the abomination of desolation in Daniel is the time of the end, the time of the resurrection. Just a matter of days, actually a very short period of time, prior to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So when you begin to see these things and put them together, now what's fascinating is it doesn't tell you what's at the end of that 1,290 days. It just says, from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination of desolation set up, there will be this many days. Then he gives you another set of days. Blessed is he that waits and comes to the 1,305 days. Totally different number of days. Here we seem to be talking about a set of days that have an end, but no beginning. We know that you have the beginning of the 1,200, this first one with the abomination of desolation. We know the other one has an end, but we don't know the beginning of the one and the end of the other. It's a strange thing that we at this point of time can't put together. He says, "But go your way till the end be, for you shall rest and stand in your lot at the end of days." Okay, the abomination of desolation we've seen in type was a statue of Jupiter Olympus placed on an altar of God in the temple after it had been polluted with swine flesh. That Jesus offered it as a sign of future events at the time of his coming and at the end of the age. Now, I want us to turn back briefly to Isaiah, the 41st chapter. Isaiah 41, in verse 22. A challenge is thrown out by God to the false gods. Isaiah chapter 41, and verse 22. He says, "Let them, that is these false gods or prophets, bring them forth, and show us what shall happen." Come on, foretell the future for us. "Let them show the former things what they be, that we may consider them and know the latter end thereof them, or declare to us things for to come." I remember once riding along the car with some students, and somebody was saying, "How do you go about proving that prophecy is dual?" And one of them said, "I don't know, I guess you just have to accept it on faith." No, you don't have to accept it on faith. Isaiah here categorically tells us that it is in studying or considering carefully the former aspect of a prophecy that you're going to understand the latter end thereof. And so Jesus said, "Let him that reads Daniel understand." So there is something in that original event dealing with this abomination of desolation and all that was around it that would help us to understand. Question: does it seem likely to you, as important as the abomination of desolation is, and this vile person, but the abomination of desolation, and it's as a sign to God's people for flight or whatever, does it seem likely that it would go unmentioned in the book of Revelation? Seems strange, doesn't it? You would think, okay, now where will I find it? Because Revelation is an awfully comprehensive prophecy of the end time. And it's hard to imagine anything so pivotal as the abomination of desolation. We know that the man of sin, or the vile person, does find an image in Revelation. What about the abomination of desolation? Well, if it's going to be anywhere in Revelation, it's going to have to pretty well be in the 13th chapter. So let's go back there and take a look at it, because this is where the man of sin is, this is where the beast is, this is where the Antichrist comes on the scene. If we're going to find it, it's most likely going to be there. The term abomination of desolation isn't found in the book of Revelation. But there are some interesting things in here that I think that, and they're questions that are very commonly raised by Christians and students of the Bible. Chapter 13. "I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. It's very important, by the way, because this 7 heads and 10 horns crops up in 2 or 3 places, and it helps you to identify just exactly what beast you're dealing with. "Upon his horns 10 crowns, upon his heads the name of blasphemy. The beast I saw was like a leopard. Now, a leopard in Daniel's prophecy was Alexander's kingdom, and his feet were like the feet of a bear. The bear in Daniel's prophecy was the Medo-Persian Empire, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. That was the Babylonian Empire. So we find this beast encompassing in this strange beast the characteristics of all of this image that Daniel originally saw, that Nebuchadnezzar saw, that Daniel interpreted, that had to do with the Babylonian kingdom in all of its successive revivals or resurrections. The dragon gave him his power and his seed and his great authority. Now we all understand, do we not, that in the book of Revelation, the dragon symbolizes Satan the devil. He is, in too many references and cross-references you can get, it's easy to identify that. I saw one of his heads, as it were, wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast, and they worshipped the dragon. They actually worshipped Satan, that gave power to the beast. They worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" There was given him a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given to him to continue for 42 months. Now, 42 months works out to be a time, and times, and a half a time. So it works out to be 3.5 years. There we are, back to that time element that Daniel mentioned again. He opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. This was characteristic of Antiochus, who fulfilled this in type. It was given to him to make war with the saints. Antiochus made war with and overcame it for a time, the Jews. Power was given him over kindreds and tongues and nations, and all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. What is the defense that keeps a person from worshiping the beast? It is the fact that they actually have received the Spirit of God and have their name written down in the book of life. If any man have an ear to hear, let him hear. Here's this sort of cryptic warning again about listening, about hearing. Like Jesus said, he that reads, let him understand. Here he says, if you have an ear to hear, hear. He that leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He that kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Herein is the patience of the saints. Now he says, I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth. He had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. What have we got? Well, any student of the Bible understands that when you start talking about a lamb, you are dealing with a symbol of Christ, the Lamb of God. When you talk about the dragon, you're dealing with Satan the devil. So here you have something that looks like or pretends to be Christ, and yet speaks with the mouth of the devil. Strange combination, isn't it? You have a demonic religious system. He exercises all the power of the first beast before him, and causes the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. He does great wonders, so he makes fire come down from heaven in the sight of men. Of course, that's one of the characteristics that Daniel mentions about the miraculous powers that are involved. He deceives them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had the power to do in the sight of the beasts, saying to them that dwell upon the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had a wound by the sword and did live, and he gave power, or had power, to give life to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. What in the world is that? Now, it's been suggested, in fact, there was an article entitled, Who is the Image of the Beast by Herman Hayes some time ago, and he made a rather interesting case that the image of the beast, that the beast itself was really the Babylonian, and yet at this point in time, Roman civil government. It was the government of Rome. And the whole structure of the Roman government, from emperor to senate to all the way down to the little other aspects of the Roman government, all of these things found a pattern in the government of a religious system, which was the image of the beast. In other words, the basic form of the government, with a papacy followed by your cardinals and bishops and all out into synods and dioceses and so forth, was an image or a model of the Roman civil government, which was really a kind of an interesting article. And you read through it, you could find a certain amount of credence in it. It does raise a very large question in your mind if, at some point in time, the Church of God then begins to adopt that system of church government, if they are then reaching out and adopting the image of the beast. But there are certain problems, though, I feel, with that traditional idea. It seems weak to me, and I have difficulty in being able to put it together. And yet the imagery that we're giving here, it's difficult to imagine that this icon of the beast, or which is what the Greek word is, icon, is actually a statue that this false prophet goes hocus pocus, and suddenly the statue steps down off its pedestal and begins to speak. The imagery does not lead itself to the image of the beast being nothing more than a statue or an idol, does it? It seems that it would have more to do with something to do with form or shape or something else. The fact of the matter is, at this point in time, I don't think we know what this is. One of the problems, and there's a very real danger in both this and in the mark of the beast. We also, years ago, published a little booklet called The Mark of the Beast. And sort of since a mark is a sign, it went back into the Old Testament and showed how the Sabbath was a sign that you were God's people, and drew the comparison of God's sign and Satan's sign. And so consequently, Sunday became the mark of the beast. There is a problem here, though. When you believe that you have found something, you have a natural tendency to stop looking for it. That's simple, isn't it? You lose a cuff link, you go rummaging around on the floor, you find it, you stop looking, don't you? Simple. When you believe that you have found the one true answer to a puzzle or an enigma or some obscure thing in the Scriptures, you have a very strong tendency to stop looking. And I'm afraid what all of us did was we read the booklet, we sort of believed it, we thought that makes sense, it may have touched a nerve, and we thought, I think I can understand that. We tucked it away in our little folder of booklets, or we put it away in our little box of booklets, and we thought that question is resolved. There's a very grave danger in that particular situation. Let me go on record as saying a couple of things. We do not know what the image of the beast is. Secondly, we do not know what the mark of the beast is yet. It is necessary for us to keep on looking. Because the danger is when you say, we know, you stop looking, and it's possible that you don't know what you thought you know. Now, the ideas on the mark of the beast, which perhaps we should go just a little further here in Revelation 13 and see what it says about it. It says in verse 16, he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Notice it's not the number of the beast, it's the number of his name. Here is the wisdom. Let him that has understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. Now, as I said, the ideas on this have gone all the way from the mark of the beast is Sunday to the mark of the beast is the Sabbath. Believe it or not, it's been suggested. It's been suggested it might be some sort of a tattoo that is placed in the right hand and in the forehead. It's even been suggested most recently that it is in credit cards. You know, that you get this little, I think J.C. Penney had the misfortune of winding up at 666 on their credit cards. I read this recently, got all my cards out to look at them very carefully to be sure there were no 666s on any of them, and sure enough, there weren't on any of them. However, it was suggested in one of these articles that if you take out a credit card and look at it and flip it over, you'll notice a little strip of magnetic tape on the back. And they're saying what they're going to do is they're going to put this 666 on that magnetic tape on the back, which can only be read by infrared scanners, and you won't know it's there, but it's there. What's wrong with what I just said? How many of you heard something wrong in what I just said? You don't read magnetic tape with infrared scanners. You read it with a magnetic scanner. I don't know what in the world the person that wrote that was talking about, or what they were doing besides displaying their ignorance. The problem is that all these people, including ourselves in years gone by, have been crying wolf, wolf, wolf. And we're like the little boy. They kept crying, wolf, wolf. And the people would all get mobilized. And the men would come out with staves and pitchforks to fend off the wolf. And there was no wolf there. And in the process of time, the real wolf came. And he cried, wolf, wolf. And no one came to help him. No one came to see. They just believed the little boy was crying wolf again. These people are all crying wolf. And the problem is that when the real wolf comes, nobody is going to listen to them. Now, there are some things to understand about the mark of the beast, though. For example, where are you supposed to receive it? In the right hand and in the forehead, right? What does that mean? What is supposed to be on the right hand and in the forehead? I want you to turn back with me to the 6th chapter of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 6. If you're going to get symbolism of something or try to understand what something means, you need to look around a little bit for it in the Bible. Deuteronomy 6, in verse 4. Hear, O Israel, The Lord our God is one Lord. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words which I command you this day shall be in your heart, and you shall teach them diligently unto your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way, when you lie down and when you rise up. And you shall bind them for a sign upon your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. Where's that? Right? It's right there on your forehead. So here's something that's on your hand and on your forehead. What does this mean? You go down to the Wailing Wall and you will see Jews with a leather thong and a little square type of a block of things bound on their right hand. There's another one bind it up here on their head. It's, I forget the term for it. It's phylactery, is it? It's what that's called. And that harkens back to all this. There's a lot of interesting discussion about what that meant and what it was supposed to signify. And of course the Jews took it just as a literal thing that you're supposed to do. What does it mean? Turn back to Exodus, the 13th chapter. Exodus chapter 13. Try to grasp this thing a little more firmly. Exodus chapter 13, and beginning in verse 6. 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread. In the 7th day shall be a feast to the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days. There shall no leavened bread be seen with you, neither shall be leaven seen with you in all your quarters. You shall show your son in that day, saying, This is done because of that which the Lord did to me when I came forth out of Egypt. And it shall be a sign unto you, what? The days of unleavened bread shall be a sign upon your hand and for a memorial between your eyes. Why? That the Lord's law may be in your mouth. For with a strong hand has the Lord brought you out of Egypt. We're not dealing merely with the Ten Commandments, brethren, when we're talking about that thing. It wasn't enough just to take 10 Commandments and write them on little parchment, roll them up into some little block or square, and tie it on your hand or on your forehead. That wasn't what God was talking about. These holy days, as is the Sabbath, he says, are a sign, and it's not very far between sign and mark, is it? As far as being able to get the idea of a distinguishment. What is it that's supposed to be on your right hand and your forehead? It is the law of God. And in this case, specifically the days of unleavened bread. When you eat unleavened bread for 7 days as a sign upon your right hand and in your forehead. What was the sign? A tattoo? A mark? A card? The sign was the outward observance of something. You know, it doesn't take any imagination to understand what he meant by that. By hand, he meant the things that you do. By your forehead, he meant the things that you think, you believe, and you decide. Now, that's admittedly my own interpretation, but let's see if we can support it. Turn back to Proverbs chapter 7. Proverbs chapter 7, verse 1. My son, keep my words. Lay up my commandments with you. Keep my commandments and live, and my law is the apple of your eye. Bind them upon your fingers, write them upon the tables of your heart. Say unto wisdom, you are my sister, and so forth. Mind, the heart or the forehead are used interchangeably in this sense. It just simply means your mind, your will, your conscious intent. And the hand or the fingers obviously means what you do. Whatever the sign then or the mark of the beast is, it is something you believe and something you practice. And I think it's something you need to take a look at, that it is something you believe and something you practice in place of what should be on your right hand and in your forehead. What should be on the fingers of your hand and what should be in your heart. What should be reflected in the way you do and the way you think, in your belief and in your faith. Well, if you look at what should be there, you find it's the law of God. You find the days of unleavened bread are that one of those signs that's supposed to be in your hand and supposed to be in your forehead or up here where it can be thought of or aware of you. Not talking about some kind of an outward mark. Had the mark of the beast been intended to be a mark in the sense of a tattoo or some imprimatur or some type of implant or something like that, it would have used the word scopos or stigma, which are used elsewhere for that type of thing. You've heard of stigmata, have you not? Stigmata is the idea of people who have a little mark in the palms of their hands that are supposedly the reproductions of the nail prints of Jesus' nail. This happens with some people in the past. So they would have used scopos or stigma. The word, however, for the mark of the beast is charagma. Now, the word is only used one other place, and that's in Acts, apart from these references in the book of Revelation to the mark of the beast. But it's used elsewhere in Greek writings, and basically it means a sculpture. It doesn't really mean a mark in your hand or something you can put on a blackboard, or mark in the sense of something you put up and shoot at. It's not that. Like Paul uses the expression, I press toward the mark of the high calling. I believe that is skopos in the Greek. Different approach. It is the word which means an image or a sculpture and would be used for an idol. Now, what is fascinating about this is that we then go back here to Revelation 13 again, which I think we should just take another quick look at it, at what he's saying here. There is a definite relationship between this image or icon of the beast and the mark of the beast being in itself an image or a sculpture or an idol in this sense. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, to receive a mark in their right hands, a charagma, in their right hands and in their forehead. Now again, let's keep in mind, we are not receiving this in terms of some outward physical mark like a tattoo, any more than when we keep the days of unleavened bread we get a mark like that. We actually show it by what we do and by what we believe, that they actually believe in and worship or serve an idol. There's been so much conversation about the number 666, and people worry about getting it on the license plate of their car. They worry about having it on a credit card. The fact of the matter is the number 666 doesn't mean a thing unless it is attached to an idolatrous observance. That the fact of the matter is, when it comes down to it, that those people who have the Spirit of God and whose names are written in the book of life will not receive the mark of the beast, even if they didn't know what it was. And I'll tell you for sure, receiving it in magnetic tape on the back of a credit card is a far cry from having it in your forehead, in your consciousness. There's a great danger, I feel, of being blindsided when a lot of this comes. And I said part of the danger comes from having cried wolf one time too many on some of these things. But I want you to turn back to 2 Thessalonians, where we find out what our defense is in this particular thing. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Maybe tie some of this together. Now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together unto him, that you be not soon shaken in mind, or be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter as from us, as that the day of Christ is at hand. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come the apostasy first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sits in the temple of God, showing that he is God. This is the one that places the abomination of desolation. This is the one that causes people to receive the mark of the beast. Remember you not that when I was with you, I told you these things. Now you know what withholds, that he might be revealed in his time. For the mystery of iniquity does already work. And elsewhere, the mysteries are identified as connected again with Babylon, the Babylonian mysteries. Only he who now lets will let until he be taken out of the way. Then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. Even him whose coming is after the power of Satan, or the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness. What's righteousness? They're identified elsewhere in the Bible. All your commandments are righteousness. The law of God describes what righteousness is. It's the law of God that's supposed to be reflected in our right hand and our forehead. That is, in the way we believe, the things we feel, the things we hold in our minds, and the things we do with our hands are supposed to be reflected in that way. Deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish. How do you know you won't be deceived by this one? It goes on to say it'll happen because they received not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. For this cause God shall send a strong delusion, that they should believe a lie, that they all might be damned who believe not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. There's that word again. But we are bound to give thanks to God always for you, brethren, beloved of the Lord, because God has from the beginning chosen you to salvation through sanctification of the Spirit and belief of the truth, whereunto he called you by our gospel to the obtaining of the glory of our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, brethren, stand fast. Hold the traditions which you have been taught, whether by word or by our epistle. You know, when Paul is writing here, and I almost get from what he writes here, as I do from elsewhere, there doesn't seem to be that great a danger of the people of God who are obeying His law and keeping the Sabbath and observing His holy days, this seems very, very little danger of them believing in or following or accepting the mark of the beast. Why is it important then? It's very important that you and I never be found guilty of crying wolf, so that when the real wolf does appear, somebody might believe us.